Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro Revenge Story. I worked for this small business IT consulting firm for 7 years, from 2016 to 2023. Owned and operated by a person we'll call Marcus. First 2 years, things were fine. Occasionally, Marcus would take things too far. He was just passionate about his opinions and always had to be right, so I'd always give him that. I didn't have to agree, but I recognized his need and left it at that. What I started to discover, however, is the turnover for the company was about 2 years, and I began to realize why. Marcus picks one worker and makes it his life's work to make that person as miserable as possible. For ego purposes, I'm guessing? For months I'd hear him shouting all the time at this one guy, Evan. After leaving meetings, Evan would go back to his office, which I had a view of, and I could just see the stress and misery on his face. Finally, I approached him. "What the hell, man? He's always giving you a hard time lately. What did you do?" I asked. Evan shook his head. "I honestly don't know." He confided in me right there about the level of hell he was experiencing and some of the things Marcus had said and done. I couldn't believe some of the details he shared. I thought things were embellished because surely people don't behave that way. Much later, I would realize he was telling the truth, as crazy as it sounded. "You wouldn't believe half the stuff he says when we're alone," Evan told me. "Last week he said my work was so bad that a trained monkey with a keyboard would be more valuable to the company." A few months later, Evan finally found another job and left. I talk to him a couple times a year, and he always says it was the best choice he ever made in his life. "Best decision I ever made was getting out of there," he said during our last call. "I actually sleep through the night now." Marcus's sights then narrowed onto me. I can take a lot, so for the next 5 years, I took it. He would insult me pretty much every day, each day becoming more colorful with his remarks. I didn't really care or take it home with me, so it wasn't a problem for me. For Marcus, I would learn it was. Unrelated, 5 years in, around 2021, I put in my notice because he asked me to get a couple certifications, promising he would take care of me if I did. Once I completed what was requested, he backed out of the agreement and played coy. When he received my notice a couple months later, he called me within a minute and begged me to stay. "Look, we can't afford to lose you right now," he pleaded. "What would it take to keep you here?" It's important to note he only asked for 2 certifications. I not only obtained those, but an additional 14 on top. Each time he would tell me, "Great job, you will be well taken care of." He lied 16 times in total on this matter. Eventually, he matched my offer from another company and increased my salary by another 15K. Not looking forward to starting a new job, I decided to stay. What I learned is I was a fool to do that, and money isn't everything. Go where you'll be happiest. That's the best life advice I can give after this experience. Marcus left me alone for a couple months after that. He wasn't in the office much either. Then, one day, it struck his fancy to start things up again, only he had run out of material. My work was solid, and he had no opportunity to criticize that. The only method he had was bashing with his ego and sarcasm, but he realized it had no impact on me. Here's a brief snippet of any given day of what it's like to be selected as his target. He would communicate a problem he was having at length. Let's say he complained about his cell phone. After he finished his story, you would provide a helpful suggestion or advice from your experience. "Have you tried resetting the network settings? That often fixes connection issues," I'd offer. In turn, he would ask with an entitled and sarcastic tone, "Oh, are you suddenly an expert on smartphones? Where did you get those credentials? The University of Google?" I learned fast. Just never speak unless spoken to. Any comment or insult he made, I would respond without emotion and just say, "Okay." Because Marcus wasn't able to get a rise out of me the old-fashioned way, he decided to create fictional content for a new direction. Our small company would go out to eat as a whole or just order in on Fridays. Once I ate half my sandwich and wrapped the remaining portion to take home. He saw me with leftover food and claimed that I was taking home dinner on his dime. "Planning on having that for dinner too? On the company tab?" he sneered. Anytime there were any leftovers, even a single French fry, he'd be there with a magnifying glass for inspection to find any conceivable way to yell. So on Fridays, I started packing my lunch. I'd order a beverage and a side. I'd finish both, then eat what I brought. If I didn't finish my packed lunch, he had no opportunity to complain. You could see his look of disappointment when he would scan my plate. "Nothing to take home today?" he'd ask, looking for something to criticize. "Nope, just finished everything," I'd reply. This went on for a couple weeks. He had no opportunity and couldn't complain. He realized he had failed again. So then he came up with the next item, the bathroom. This I actually researched and couldn't find anything legally I could do about. But anytime anyone would use the restroom, he would blame me for the smell. Instead of hello when passing in the hallway, he would say, "Did you use spray?" Or "Did you light a match?" as hatefully as he could, but that was his normal. It went much deeper than this, more than I care to share. But I honestly believe Marcus has a fetish on this topic, which is why I looked into it legally. It was just always on his mind and a little too important to him. Let's just leave the rest unsaid. I must have visually tipped him off that I didn't approve of this because he never got bored with it. However, I did at least get him to stop asking about if I use spray. Anytime I used the bathroom, even to take a piss, I'd use the entire can of air freshener. This wasn't an easy task as I'd have to mask my face to empty that entire thing. It takes surprisingly long to empty an entire can in a session. One thing is certain, when I was finished, someone had used the spray, and Marcus was buying a new can. Took about 5 weeks, but I think he figured it out after spending so much on spray. He stuck to just asking about matches after that. He even provided them in the bathroom. One day in March 2023, we were out with a client. The current topic at this moment was, "What is your favorite meal?" "Hot wings," I answered. "I could eat those every day." Marcus jumped in with his comment, "Just think how bad the bathroom would smell." Most at the table wouldn't get the context and direction of that comment, but I knew. He did this in front of a client in public while people were eating. "Excuse me?" the client asked, clearly confused. "Nothing," Marcus replied with a smirk. "Inside joke." I almost walked out. Then I remembered he drove, and it's a long way back. Plus, Marcus is over 60. What kind of person knocks out a senior? I had to chant that in my mind to keep control. I never get pissed, but after years, this was the last straw. I seriously pleaded with myself all day not to do it because I'd go to jail and he would win. During this time period, he also started playing with my money. Behind 5 months with reimbursement, a week late on paychecks, stuff like that. If you asked where it was, he'd say, "Next week." If you explained he already said that last week, then he'd play coy. Did I say that? I don't recall. "Must have slipped my mind," he'd say with a shrug. I finished out the day without reacting somehow. It took everything I had, but I wasn't going to leave this unanswered. That was dangerous and too close. If he wanted trouble, I'd give it to him. I would get even in a lawful way, somehow. Then the idea came to me that night. I did my research, and odds were in my favor that it could work. I decided I would mirror him until he fired me. When he fired me, he would have to pay half my current salary of $65K until I got a new job. You know what? I could live perfectly fine on $32.5K. Why not make him pay out of his pocket $32.5K for everything he had said and done? He would have to pay this over the course of 6 months or until I found a new job. So my goal was to make him pay me $32,500 to be exact over 6 months as restitution for what he said at that table. I read up on all the rules in my state for unemployment. Each state is different, but basically, to qualify for it, it can't be your fault if you were fired. So if I stood there and told him where to put it, that's a no-go. However, if I was laid off, I would qualify, so I hit him where it hurt first. His favorite thing in the world is meetings. He loves to hear himself talk and take you step by step through his thought process with a noble tone, congratulating himself for his thinking and why his way is the best way. So I started speaking up and illustrated more efficient ways that cost less. "Actually, Marcus," I'd say during meetings, "if we use cloud-based solutions for this client, we could cut implementation time by half and save about 20% on costs." He would argue, sometimes red-faced mad, especially if others in the meeting liked my idea. He knew he was wrong, but he would dismiss them and demand it be done his way. "That's an interesting theory," he'd snap, "but we're going with my approach. End of discussion." I then started talking about him within earshot on purpose. I'd say things like, "Make sure you perform that Marcus's way. Takes longer, but it's better than him releasing the Kraken." It would make everyone laugh, but it wasn't a direct insult. Trust me when I say this guy has a massive ego, and I was counting on this for pissing him off. I laid it on thick. In time, it took its toll. I knew it did because of what came next. His retaliation was the kitchen sink. He had nothing, so he started accusing me of things, then playing coy when it came to reviewing the details or facts. He would put words in my mouth, I'd state he was wrong, and then he would tell me I was. All he was doing was opening the door so he could play a vengeful sarcasm game. I knew it was a game, so I decided to take his new toy away from him by just going along with whatever he said, which further made him mad because what he was doing had no effect on me. "You're always late to meetings," he'd accuse. "If you say so, Marcus," I'd reply calmly. "Don't you have anything to say for yourself?" he'd demand, frustrated. "Not really, if that's how you see it, okay?" Fast forward 6 months to September 2023. Yes, I was still working there, but we were only receiving a couple calls a day, which were 15 minutes each. This was due to Marcus's bad business decisions. While I took delight knowing he was hemorrhaging money for months, I was hoping for a layoff to execute my plan. Nothing. I had to make him want to fire me. It was the only way. I had to beat him at his own game while providing the illusion he was in control, so I turned up the heat. I was asked to travel to a client by Jason, the second in command. "I'm sorry, man," I told Jason. "I haven't received reimbursement in 6 months for travel expenses, and I just had my work cell phone service turned off. With the way business is right now, things aren't looking good. I'd be stupid to take on more expenses, and I'm owed over $2,000 as it is. Once that's paid in full, I'd be more than happy to continue on a week-to-week basis after reimbursements." "Are you serious?" Jason asked. "He hasn't paid you in 6 months? That's completely unacceptable. Let me talk to him." That day, Marcus had a meeting with me and set up a payment plan to pay the money back. After 3 weeks, it would be paid. "So, just to be clear," I said to Marcus, "understood, after 3 weeks, I'll be on the road again, cool." I was just making sure he understood. Because he wanted to play games and not pay the amount in full, Marcus was now going to pay my salary for 3 weeks to do nothing until the reimbursement fee was paid. The guy has a several million-dollar house, goes on vacations, has boats, etc. Out of all the things I'd done so far, this had made the most significant impact because I outwitted him at his own game, which embarrassed him in the eyes of others. Why? Because Jason was instructed to drive me anywhere I was needed, so I had my own personal taxi driver for the few calls we had over the next 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, he paid 2 people, me and Jason, to drive and watch me work. I was friends with Jason, and he knew exactly what I was doing, and he loved every second of it. "This is the best assignment I've had in years," Jason joked as we drove to a client. "Getting paid to chauffeur you around while Marcus stews in his office." Then on the 3rd week, 3 days until the final payment, it happened. Marcus entered my office and gave me the familiar demeaning dog wave gesture to follow him without speaking. We sat down, and he asked me what the problem was. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked with feigned concern. I told him, "The problem is you need a new hobby. In one hand, you have someone sitting here that busted his ass for the last 7 years. In the other, your need to bash someone's face in the dirt with your ego. The problem with me is I won't conform and provide both." He asked for some examples. "Give me specifics. When have I ever been unfair to you?" I said, "You know exactly what I'm talking about, and even if I did review them, you'd play coy." He then played coy about being coy, and I laughed. After a pause, he said, "If you feel that way, why didn't you speak to me about it?" I reminded him, "I did, twice, and both times you humiliated me for it and said, 'This is it.' What my 20-year IT career had to do with your ego, I'll never know." He responded with, "You're behind the times, your work has been poor, and out of the kindness of my heart, I gave you a raise after you demanded it." I responded with, "Okay." Then he finally said what I wanted to hear. "I want to call it quits." I remained professional and communicated that I was sorry things didn't work out. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing stuff with coworkers on how to handle certain things. I shook his hand with a smile and left without saying anything negative. The fruit of my labor would do the talking for me shortly. En route on the way home, I called family members to tell them the good news. Everyone was so happy for me. It finally happened. "Mom, you won't believe it. I'm free," I said into the phone. "Marcus finally fired me." "That's wonderful news, honey. I know how miserable you've been," she replied. When I arrived home, I promptly adjusted the dates on the unemployment forms I had filled out already in Wait and submitted them. I called the state and confirmed everything was documented accurately on my end, and now it was the waiting game. My plan wasn't realized by Marcus until he received the letter in the mail about a week later stating he was going to have to shell out my salary for the next 6 months or until I found a job. Panicked at this point, he realized what I had set him up for. So he claimed he fired me for poor work performance. The state said, "Okay, prove it." In this state, it's the employer's burden to prove it. My record had no blemishes, and he couldn't use a client as reference because a number of people at any given client would vouch for me and the truth, as they all liked me and appreciated my work. Realizing the crap storm he was in now, I'm told from Jason that Marcus was on the phone with the unemployment office quite a while, twisting and turning out fake stories. Bottom line, the state needed to see documented verbal and written warnings signed, so he couldn't fake them. He called his lawyer, and his lawyer told him he was screwed. "You have no documentation?" his lawyer apparently asked. "No written warnings? No performance improvement plan? Nothing?" "Why would I need all that?" Marcus had replied. He knew he was underperforming. Later, Marcus told coworkers he felt bad for me that I couldn't find work, and he decided to give unemployment to me. That officially confirmed his ego was affected. He didn't want anyone to know the truth. At this point, he realized I got the better of him when I fought back, and I won big. In a last-ditch effort, he lied about how much I made. The state sent me paperwork stating this fact and asked me to prove my salary, so I gave them copies of checks and pay stubs for the last 6 months. After that, things went easy. He was flagged for lying, which made the remaining steps effortless, the state rep told me. For the reason I was terminated, I wrote, Marcus, the owner, made some poor business decisions that impacted the company, losing business and clients. He let me go as a business decision. In his shoes, I'd have done the same and understand. I wrote it that way for a reason, but Marcus didn't realize why. I knew what his reaction would be. The state saw a down-to-earth guy that was honest and understanding on paper. Then they saw Marcus's predicted response of being difficult, most likely yelling, and of course lying. I had no doubt that would seal the deal simply on the evaluation of character before the facts even entered into it. His reaction being, his ego had to take it up the ass. Once for failing as a businessman, again for me saying so on state paperwork, and lastly accepting that I got the better of him and all this time I had been coaxing him to make this move. The only thing left to do was pay me every single week, and his money goes to the state first, then the state sends it to me so he can't play games with my money or the state would come after him. Over the next 6 months, from October 2023 to March 2024, I took that time to enjoy myself, pursue hobbies, and live life to the fullest on his dime as a reward for his comment. Once the letter came to renew unemployment, Marcus would no longer have to pay, or only a percentage, I forget. The important thing to know is taxpayers would have to pay after 6 months, not Marcus. So I declined the renewal. 3 weeks later, I had a new job. It was either that or knock him out during that lunch. It wasn't easy, took work, but I'm proud of the way I handled it. I feel vindicated. It's pretty rare the world is balanced. Evil often wins. But not this time. This time it cost Marcus $32,500 to be exact. All in all, I can say 10/10 would do it again. Due to his age, I can't imagine that it would be a humbling experience at this point, but it was for me. Money isn't everything. There is only one thing of true value, your happiness. A year later, I'm very happy now. I enjoy my new job and my new boss. I discovered myself again, who I really am. The goofy, friendly guy. My light is no longer dimmed by a dark presence, and I can be myself without punishment. The next one is an entitled people story, so this happened about 2 years ago, and I'm still getting a kick out of how perfectly everything worked out. I figured this community would appreciate the sweet, sweet justice that unfolded. A bit of background first. I inherited my grandfather's property when he passed away, a nice chunk of land with an old farmhouse that sits about half a mile back from the main county road. The property has been in my family for over 60 years, way before any of the surrounding development happened. The key detail here is that my property includes a private gravel road that runs from the county road all the way back to my house. Now, about 15 years ago, a big housing development went up on the land adjacent to mine. Really fancy place called Willowbrook Estates. You know the type, with perfectly manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and houses that all look like they came from the same cookie cutter. They formed an HOA pretty much immediately, as these places always do. Here's where it gets interesting. When the developers built Willowbrook Estates, they made what I can only assume was a cost-cutting decision. Instead of building their own access road from the county road to connect to their main street, they built their entrance to connect directly to my private road. Essentially, anyone driving into or out of Willowbrook Estates had to use about 200 feet of my private road to get to the county road. My grandfather was still alive when this happened, and apparently the developers approached him about it. Being the nice guy he was, he said sure, no problem, people can use the road. No formal agreement, no paperwork, just a handshake deal with some long-gone construction company. The HOA folks who moved in just assumed it was a public road or that they had some kind of easement. For 15 years, everyone was happy with this arrangement. Then my grandfather passed away, I inherited the property, and decided to move in myself. I work remotely, so living out in the country seemed perfect. For the first few months, everything was fine. I waved at the neighbors driving by, they waved back, very peaceful. That's when I met Patricia, the HOA president. Patricia knocked on my door on a Saturday morning, clipboard in hand, looking like she meant business. She informed me that as a resident whose property connected to Willowbrook Estates, I was now subject to HOA regulations. I needed to pay the annual dues, follow the community guidelines, and bring my property up to their standards. I politely explained that I wasn't actually part of Willowbrook Estates. My property predated their development by decades, and I had never signed any HOA agreements. Patricia seemed confused by this concept. She insisted that since I was clearly part of the community and people had to drive through my road to access the neighborhood, I was obviously subject to their rules. I showed her my property deed, which clearly outlined my boundaries and made no mention of any HOA covenants. Patricia studied it like she was trying to find a loophole, then said she'd need to consult with the board about this situation. A week later, I got a formal letter from the HOA. They acknowledged that my property wasn't technically part of their development, but they had several demands regarding our shared roadway. They wanted me to 1. Pave the gravel section of road on my property to match their asphalt standards. 2. Install proper lighting along the road section. 3. Maintain landscaping on both sides of the road to their specifications. 4. Pay a monthly fee for road maintenance and community upkeep. 5. Submit to regular inspections to ensure compliance. The letter was full of legal-sounding language about community standards, property values, and shared infrastructure responsibilities. They gave me 30 days to comply or face further action. I'll admit I was pretty annoyed. This was my road on my property that I wasn't even charging them to use. Now they wanted me to spend thousands of dollars to upgrade it to their standards and pay them monthly fees. The audacity was breathtaking. I called the number on the letter and ended up speaking with Patricia again. I explained that this was a private road on private property and I wasn't subject to their rules or fees. Patricia's tone got pretty frosty pretty quickly. She said that whether I liked it or not, this road served their community and they had standards to maintain. She couldn't have people thinking they lived in a neighborhood where residents were allowed to have substandard infrastructure. That's when she made the comment that really set me off. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember her exact words, but it was something like, if you can't properly maintain community infrastructure, then maybe you shouldn't be allowed to have it at all. Now, Patricia probably meant this as a threat, like they'd report me to some authority or take legal action. But what she actually did was give me a brilliant idea for malicious compliance. See, Patricia was absolutely right. If I couldn't properly maintain community infrastructure to their standards, then maybe I shouldn't be allowed to have it at all. The thing is, it wasn't community infrastructure, it was my infrastructure on my property. I spent the weekend doing research. I confirmed that the road was entirely on my property, that there were no easements or legal agreements giving the HOA any rights to use it, and that my grandfather's informal permission died with him. I also looked up what would be required to restrict access to my private road. Monday morning, I called a fencing company. I didn't do anything dramatic or immediate. I wanted this to be perfectly legal and by the book. I had the fencing company survey the exact property line where my land ended and the HOA development began. Then I had them install a nice, sturdy gate right at that boundary, with a good, strong lock. I also put up several signs along my road. Private road, no trespassing, authorized vehicles only, just to make everything crystal clear. The gate went up on a Thursday. I made sure to time it for mid-morning after the usual rush of people leaving for work, but before anyone would be coming home for lunch. My phone started ringing around noon. The first call was from Patricia, and she was not happy. She demanded to know why there was a gate blocking the community road. I very politely explained that I had thought about her comments regarding infrastructure maintenance, and she was absolutely right. If I couldn't maintain community infrastructure to their standards, I shouldn't be allowed to have it. So I had decided to restrict access to my private road to authorized vehicles only. Patricia sputtered something about this being illegal and that she was going to call the police. I encouraged her to do exactly that. The police did come out that afternoon. The officer was actually pretty friendly about the whole thing. I showed him my property deed, the survey markers, and explained the situation. He confirmed that yes, it was my private road, and yes, I had every right to restrict access to it. He did ask if I was planning to provide any access for the HOA residents since they'd been using it for years. I told him I was certainly willing to discuss access arrangements, but first I'd need the HOA to acknowledge that it was my private property and that any access was a privilege I was granting, not a right they possessed. I also mentioned that I'd need them to drop their demands about dues and compliance with their standards. The officer said that seemed reasonable and suggested the HOA board contact me to work something out. That's when the real fun began. Apparently, when the HOA developers built Willowbrook Estates, they had never actually constructed an alternative route to the county road. My private road wasn't just a convenient shortcut, it was the only way in or out of the neighborhood. The pretty entrance they'd built, with its stone pillars and fancy Willowbrook Estates sign, just led to my road. Without access to my road, the 37 families in Willowbrook Estates were completely cut off from the outside world. The first day, people tried to go around. A few residents attempted to drive across the undeveloped land adjacent to the neighborhood, but that ended with several cars getting stuck in muddy fields and one person needing a tow truck. By day 2, Patricia was leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. The HOA residents were having to park their cars on the county road and walk about a quarter mile through fields to get to their houses. People were missing work, kids were missing school, and everyone was getting very, very upset with the HOA board. Day 3 brought what I can only describe as a delegation. Patricia showed up with 4 other board members, all looking like they hadn't slept much. They were ready to negotiate. Patricia started off by saying they might be willing to waive the compliance requirements for my property as a gesture of goodwill. I thanked her for the generous offer, but pointed out that they had no authority to impose compliance requirements on me in the first place, so there wasn't really anything to waive. Then one of the other board members, I think he was the treasurer, mentioned that they could probably arrange for the HOA to take over maintenance of the shared road section. I clarified that there was no shared road section, just my private road that I had been allowing them to use. This went back and forth for a while, with them trying various angles to make it sound like they were doing me favors, and me politely but firmly explaining that I wasn't asking for favors, I was just exercising my property rights. Finally, Patricia asked what it would take for me to reopen access. I told them it was simple. First, I wanted a formal written acknowledgement from the HOA that the road was my private property and that any access was being granted at my discretion. Second, I wanted a written apology for their demands and threats. Third, I wanted them to reimburse me for the cost of the survey and gate installation, since their unreasonable demands had made it necessary. The board members huddled up for a whispered conference. Patricia looked like she was chewing glass, but the treasurer was nodding along. I think he was doing math in his head about how much it was going to cost to build an alternative road. They agreed to my terms. But here's where my malicious compliance got even better. See, I had specified that I wanted reimbursement for the survey and gate installation. I didn't say anything about gate removal. I kept the gate. Now, instead of having an open road that anyone could use anytime, the HOA residents have to live with the reality that their access depends entirely on my goodwill. I'm not unreasonable about it. I keep the gate open during normal hours and only close it at night for security. But every single person who drives in or out of Willowbrook Estates has to pass through my gate, on my road, and there's no question about who controls access. The HOA did end up paying me for the survey and gate costs, about $3,200 total. They also had to send a formal letter acknowledging my property rights and apologizing for the misunderstanding about my obligations to their community standards. Best of all, Patricia stepped down as HOA president about 2 months later. Apparently, the other residents weren't too happy about how she'd handled the situation that left them all stranded and hiking through muddy fields to get home. The new HOA president is much more reasonable. They even asked if I'd be interested in them paying for regular road maintenance, since they're the primary users of that section. I agreed to let them handle winter snow plowing and pothole repairs. It's worked out pretty well. I still get a chuckle every time I see the fancy stone entrance to Willowbrook Estates, with my very practical metal gate just a few hundred feet down the road. It's a nice daily reminder that sometimes the best way to handle unreasonable demands is to give people exactly what they're asking for. Patricia was absolutely right. If I couldn't maintain community infrastructure to their standards, I shouldn't be allowed to have it at all, so I didn't. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work at a mid-tier clothing store, and our district manager came through last month giving us the usual corporate pep talk. During the meeting, she kept emphasizing how we should dress for the job you want, not the job you have, and think like leaders. Now, our dress code is pretty relaxed, basically just look professional and wear something from our store. Most of us wear jeans and a nice top or sweater from our inventory. I decided to take her advice literally. Started showing up in full business formal tailored suits. Thrifted because retail wages. Dress shirts, ties, you know the works. I even bought a cheap briefcase that I carry around the store, which I got from a cash out on Grizzly's Quest. At first, customers started assuming I was the manager and would come to me with complaints and returns. I'd politely redirect them, but it was happening constantly. My actual manager seemed confused, but couldn't really say anything since I was following dress code and the DM's advice. The best part was when the DM came back for her monthly visit. She saw me restocking shelves in my full suit and tie, briefcase sitting nearby, and just stared for like 10 seconds. She asked my manager about it, and he just shrugged and said, "She's dressing for the job she wants." Now half my co-workers have started wearing more formal clothes too, and our store apparently has the most professional-looking team in the district. The DM hasn't mentioned the dress code since. Anyway, thank you for watching.